Sorry I have like such an elaborate face on. I'm testing out a foundation and some other stuff. I'm trying to learn how to do some contour bullshit. I don't really like to do like heavy contour because I like all my ethnic features, but you know, it would be nice to just highlight my high cheekbones, because I do have high cheekbones, because as you can see, I have them. But sometimes it's like my face is all just a mold of pudding, and so they don't get to shine. So I'm trying to practice new things, and I thought, why not do it while I'm doing this? So anyway, today we are going to be discussing for our first video in the Black History Month segment for 2017, colorism. Now, I chose colorism because colorism is one of those universal issues that I think all people of color have to deal with, because colorism exists in Asian cultures and Latino cultures and Black cultures, and even to a certain degree there are sort of issues within white culture dealing with like color, but it's very different from, I think, people of color in general. And so I picked this video because I picked this topic because I felt like it was something that I think every Black person can remember the moment when they realized when color mattered to them. Because I have a dark-skinned mother and a lighter-skinned father, and I never once questioned my mother's own beauty. But when you are out in the world and you're out in the ether and you are surrounded by the images of anti-Blackness around you, it is hard, even when you grow up with a very pro-Black family or culture, to not sort of absorb some of those things, and you have to work actively to counter it as you get older. What I think is interesting about colorism is that it, like everything else, goes back to slavery. Basically, when slave masters began raping their slaves and creating I'm going to use a term for this particular video for historical reasons, when they began to create mixed race or mulatto children, they were seen as attractive by the white ruling class because they still had, you know, the darker phenotype, the curlier hair, but they were lighter skinned. And so what some slave masters would do is start breeding out these lighter skinned women and put them up for auction. They were called fancy girls up for auction, and white slave owners would want to buy these girls for them to be, you know, mistresses, and also just to make their house look good. Having lighter skinned slaves was seen as a marker of success. And from that very beginning of this difference between the lighter mulatto slaves that are in the house and the darker skinned slaves that are in the field, we have as a culture been dealing with this dichotomy ever since. And the frustrating part is that as further on as we go in our history, we're still always being brought back to it, because the realities are that because these lighter-skinned slaves were in the house, they would have access to sometimes education or privileges. And I say privileges in air quotes because I think one of the issues that comes up whenever you talk about colorism is, and we're trying to have a frank conversation with it, so I'm just going to be frank about it, is that sometimes light-skinned people get butthurt because they feel like their oppression as lighter-skinned Black people is equal to the oppression that darker-skinned Black people feel, and that is just untrue. And I say this not because one existing belittles the other or vice versa, but because it is not the exact same experience. When you are a lighter-skinned Black person, you get treated differently than a darker-skinned Black person. There are statistics to back this up. It's not just anecdotes. It's not just like, well, this guy didn't like me because he doesn't date high yellow chicks. It's like, that may exist for you personally, but these things have a deeper marker for darker-skinned women, and specifically women, because the concepts of colorism are different if you are a man and if you are a woman. Talk on that briefly, but just put it here. Yes, lighter-skinned slaves had certain privileges while still being slaves and still having a terrible go at it, which allowed them to eventually, when they either freed themselves or eventually became free, made them leaders in the African American community. When you look back at the leaders that we have had throughout history, from Franklin Douglass, W. Du Bois, so many of them are lighter skinned mixed race people, because that marker of once it existed, it became a marker of class, of beauty. And that still existed even though slavery did not. And therefore, up until the 70s and 60s, when you had the sort of like Black Power, Black is beautiful movement coming on, for the longest time, lighter skinned people were still seen as the superior ones. And even then, I mean, Malcolm X was a mixed race man, through rape, but still a mixed race man. Martin Luther King was a fairly medium-toned man. Coretta Scott was a very, like, wasn't a light-skinned woman, but a medium-toned woman. And so you see these trends existing. Angela Davis, light-skinned woman. And this is because, in a lot of ways, that even people in the civil rights movement knew, which is why you had Claudette Colvin not being the leader of the Montgomery Bus boycott, but Rosa Parks, who was a lighter-skinned, mixed-race woman, is that white society felt more comfortable around mixed-race, lighter-skinned people because they made them feel comfortable. They had features of beauty that they could acknowledge and see that were close to them, and therefore they could recognize as beautiful or recognize as civilized, because those markers have carried out throughout history. And even today, we deal with this in a still frustrating but complex way in terms of dating, in terms of, you know, who gets what roles in movies. I mean, what I found interesting, and I found this in the book that I used for a lot of my research, both when I was writing my thesis on this, is this book called The Color Complex. I'll link to it below of where you can purchase it. But this was a really good look at sort of, you know, it first was published about 20 years ago, and it has a newly updated, it's been updated and revised, I think, when the whole team hashtag light skin, dark skin issue started rising up. And it's a really great way of seeing the scope of colorism throughout history and how it integrates every part of Black life, from how we wear our hair, from how we wear our clothes, from how we see each other, how we date. And it really puts the context of history at the forefront, because it's easy to just say, well, that it's just like a preference or it's a passing trend. This is the way things have always been. And I think that's the hardest thing about dealing with the issue of colorism, is that to acknowledge it as an issue means unboxing so much stuff that I feel a lot of people are just not willing to do. And one of the things they mention is that in the 1920s, there was this study, this man by the name of Melville Herskowitz studied successful couples in Harlem and found that more than half had wives that were lighter than their spouses, and 14.5% were around the same color. And that still happens today. Still, we have couples where there's a dark-skinned man and his lighter-skinned wife all the time. And when that doesn't happen, for example, Denzel Washington and his wife, I forget his name, but he's that really, really, everyone always loves him because he's like Jesse Williams. His wife is a darker skinned, more physically looking Black woman than he is, and that was usually like, oh my god, he really does love the sister, blah blah blah. It's seen as such a nuanced, crazy, radical thing to have a Black successful man be with an equally Black woman in terms of phenotype. What I didn't recognize at first when I was younger, when Barack Obama was running for office the first time, was the importance of that. The importance that his relationship with Michelle Obama was to the Black community, of showing this successful light-skinned man with a darker-skinned wife. And in a lot of ways, I think it made him even more popular within Black women, because we don't see that at that level often. Part of the reason why Michelle is such a beloved figure in the Black community, even when people go back and forth about Barack, is because of the empowering feeling it is to see a dark-skinned Black woman in the highest office, well, one of the highest offices a woman can have in the United States. And not just her brilliance and her intellect, but also her beauty. Because I think when it comes to beauty, we get to the real crux of how colorism is so painful, is because for women, because with men, the light-skin, dark-skin issue is about masculinity. It's about who's seen as more masculine and tougher and stronger. Which is why when the whole Drake Meek Mill thing comes from, it's like, it's funny that Meek Mill gets like bodied by Drake, because Drake is a light-skinned, mixed-race singing nigga, as he puts it back to back. And Drake is supposed to be this hardcore, Black, dark-skinned guy from Philly, like, and he gets beat up verbally by this, like, light-skinned corny ball, light-skinned dude. And, you know, light-skinned men are, like, sensitive, they're corny, they're bougie. Those are the things about them. It doesn't have anything to do with their attractiveness. Their masculinity can get called into question, but they can easily pound that down. And I think, overall, I don't think black women do have the same hang-ups about colorism for their children, but I don't think it stops them as actively from dating dark-skinned men as it does for men who don't want to be with dark-skinned women. I know we had Tony Childs in Girlfriends who's like, I don't date dark-skinned men. But I think that's a much smaller group than the reverse is. In my opinion, of course, black men, let me know what you think, because I'm coming at this from a female perspective. But I think this carries out because all of the sexy, beautiful figures that are represented for black people are all mixed race and light skinned. You know, Beyonce, light skinned, wears a blonde weave all the time. Again, this is not to dismiss their blackness or say that they're not black. That's not the issue. Discussing colorism is not about quantifying who's really black and who's not. It's about acknowledging why certain people who look a certain way and look less or so phenotypically black get advantages that darker skinned, more ethnic looking people do not get. And this is something that goes across the board for all races, because how many times do we have characters who are supposed to be, you know, Asian or Latina and they're mixed race? They're like, their mother was Latina and their father is like German, Scottish, blah blah blah. Like, just the person who got cast in the Mulan movie to play the new live action Mulan, you know, her mother is Asian, but her father is like, you know, Scottish, French, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're still Asian. They still belong in this community. But why is it that only light-skinned, mixed-race people represent the whole race over the spectrum of representation that we get in the media? Like I said, Beyonce, light-skinned woman with a blonde weave. Rihanna, light-skinned woman. Nicki Minaj, mixed race and light-skinned. Zoe Saldana, not as light-skinned, but mixed race. And even within the young activists that we have today, like Amandla, light-skinned, curly hair, Yara from Blackish, she's mixed race, half Iranian, half black, so, you know, she always has her, like, different hairstyles going, light-skinned, Zendaya, I remember there was this whole issue, it was like, I think it was the cover of Ebony or Essence, I think maybe Ebony, and it was Harry Belafonte, Jesse Williams, and Zendaya as, like, showing, like, young black activists or activists in the black community. And it's, like, 3 light-skinned people. And it's, like, still, we cannot give the darker-skinned people in the community their due and their chance to be seen and represented. Because as much as we love Viola Davis, Octavia Spencer, Gabrielle Sidibe, like, and we're not giving them the same opportunities to be ingenues, to be delicate, to be beautiful, to be seen the way we give our lighter-skinned, you know, black people. And every time you say this, light-skinned people get sensitive. Like, I remember there in the terrible documentary Light Girls, like, it was so painful to watch all these light-skinned women talk about how people would be mad at them because they felt like they were being stuck up because they were prettier than them. And they're like, but you do think that. That's the issue, is that they want to act as though their struggle of being seen as prettier is the same struggle as being seen as ugly and stupid. It's not. It's just not. And you cannot, and that doesn't take away from your struggle as a black person to acknowledge that darker skinned people have it worse than you. It just doesn't. Like, you're not losing anything by it. It is worse to be seen as a stupid, ignorant thug than to be seen as a bougie, pretty girl. Like, let's just be real. And the idea that you have to somehow work harder to be black when you are lighter skinned is, while there is some validity to it in terms of, like, people will call you Hyella and call your black card into question. But they will call your black card into question if you watch the wrong kind of cartoons, or you read books, or you do any kind of thing. And we'll talk about this when I talk about sort of, like, what it means to not be black enough in the community sometimes. But your blackness being called into question for those reasons is not the same as someone who is dark-skinned being seen as animalistic, as angry, as inherently unfeminine, as desexualized, asexualized at the same time. Like, that's worse. And it's okay to say that. It doesn't make you less having issues to deal with. But that's the reality. And I think that with colorism, it's hard because everyone wants to be in the struggle. Everyone wants to have the same struggle as everybody else, but we don't. We, depending on who you are and what your identity is in the community, your struggle is different, and that's okay. We are still one community. It's okay to acknowledge that we have different problems. The point is to come together and fight for everyone's problems and not just put it all on ourselves and feel bad for ourselves because, oh, they don't like me because I'm light-skinned. Once you understand how colorism works, you see it all the time. Like, every time I see it, like when I was watching Riverdale, and I realized how dark Josie is, the actress who plays Josie and the Pussycats. She is probably the darkest main character I have ever seen on a CW show. And that's an accomplishment, which is sad as fuck. Because it's the CW, not even the greatest barometer of entertainment. But yet the idea of having someone who's finally dark-skinned, not medium tone, not light skin, dark skin, as one of the main characters of a CW show, and originally a white character, that's something. Because we get the Iris voice. Like, Candace Patton is a medium tone woman. I'm not trying to like say that she's not as black as someone else, because she is. She's black and she's beautiful and I love her. But to see a curly haired black person like the actress who plays Josie and the Pussycats is so revolutionary, because we get the pretty lights. Like, I remember when Dope and Creed came out. Sorry, I'm just talking about those because I'm just going to get real. I remember when Dope and Creed came out and Zoe Kravitz and Tessa Thompson were playing the two love interests. And I was talking to one of my friends, Sade, hey girl, and I was like, how is it in both of these movies they have two love interests who are these light-skinned girls with these long bantu knot braids who probably smell like kente oil, and you know who's in the alternative music and just like all, like the perfect example of like the light-skinned like alternative like girl. Like, that's the new standard. It's only light-skinned girls. It's only light-skinned girls. Like, why could, like, Tessa Thompson's amazing. I met her in real life. She's gorgeous. I'm happy she's gonna be in a Marvel movie. Do up. But like, why can't we ever have those characters be dark-skinned? Why can't a girl who's Gabrielle Union's complexion be the spiritual light-skinned girl? Why can't that be her? Instead, Gabrielle Union has spent almost her entire career playing angry black girls who gonna take a man. Because that's the way the culture has put us in. That the light-skinned girls are the sweet ingenues and the dark-skinned girls are going to take your man because they put out. And we don't try to fix it. And we have to. Because we did not make these stereotypes for ourselves. They were put onto us. And therefore, to change them, we have to acknowledge them, deal with it, and move forward the best way we can. So on that note, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please leave comments below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about the topic. Subscribe, and also I just wanted to give a shout out to Adorned by Chi. I bought this shirt off their website, and I have a bunch of shirts that I bought that I'm going to be wearing during these videos because they're all black nerd clothes. Link to her stuff below. This is not a sponsored video. I paid for all these shirts, but I just thought Black History Month, we're going to support black artists and talk about black people who do awesome shit. So anyway, love to hear what you guys say, and I'll see you guys soon.